Hello, and welcome to Call of the Runes. My name is Walter McGrory, and today we're going to talk about Yera. Yera is the fourth rune of the second Ead, and it means year. It's phonetically represented by the letter J. Yera is going to represent the turning of the seasons. The hailstorms that we've seen drift away, the ice melts, and we prepare to reap a plentiful bounty. It is time to harvest what we have sown, and our efforts are no longer dependent solely on the whims of the Norns. This is a rune of the seasons and the turning of the year. And with that, let's begin. We'll start at the rune poems. The Norwegian rune poem reads as follows. Plenty is a boon to men. I say that Frodi was generous. The first line of the Norwegian rune poem immediately alludes to the most critical aspect of Yera. In modern day society, most food is purchased in stores and thereby not grown locally. That means that if there has been a drought or there's been a problem in the supply chain, prices might go up slowly, but food is still available. In the olden days, food came in seasons. You could only buy the food as it grew and as long as it could be stored. It couldn't come from another place, it didn't come from greenhouses. This rune is a rune of bounty and harvest. The moment that there is enough to eat, that almost everything comes to its fruition. The name Frodi is a little bit more enigmatic, and there's three possible interpretations for this second line. The first one is that Frodi has been speculated to be one of the nicknames of Freyr. In the context of the poem, that makes sense. Freyr is a god of fertility and plenty. In Heimskringla, Freyr falls in love with a Jotun maiden called Gurthur, and at the end of the saga, they are to be wed in a place called Bari. Bari, the translation is a little bit contested, but one of the interpretations is Island of Grain or Grain Island. That translation fits with Freyr being a fertility god, and also with the tradition of having a ritual wedding or having sex in a farm field in order to magically increase the fertility of the land. This was a these customs were widespread through Germanic territories. So the first option is that Frodi was Freyr and he was the god of the harvest, and therefore he was the one who was thanked for a bountiful harvest. Frodi is also the name of several Danish kings, both mythical and historical. And a king in the old days was more than just the figurehead for the state. He didn't just have political power. The king was often thought of as the literal representation of the kingdom he ruled. A strong and vital king would ensure a bountiful harvest and mild winters and economic growth, and on the flip side, a weak king would cause the weather to be worse, to be the land to wither. This extends a little bit in the third vision of what Frodi might mean, because burial places of beloved kings sometimes became places of worship, and the kings themselves were then treated as Alfar, spirits. There is a strong relationship between Alfar, elves, spirits, and burial mounds. We still know many stories about them. We've read them in fantasy books. And there's many myths in Europe around a hapless shepherd or greedy thief that accidentally or purposefully enters a grave mound. The thief is usually quickly turned around by the supernatural forces that haunt such a tomb, but the accidental wanderer often shares a night at the court before leaving, sometimes blessed, sometimes cursed. The most famous examples of this are those of Charlemagne and King Arthur. Both are said to sleep under a hill somewhere until the time of their country's greatest need, and then they will rise again to lead their country forward. So a king sometimes got such a mythical status that they became a somewhat of a deity, or at least a protective spirit of the land. The Frodi mentioned here might be representing one of the earlier living Frodis who has deceased and is now watching over the land, giving plentiful harvest every year as long as sacrifice keeps coming. In Ynglinga saga, Snorri, who is, and this has to be remembered, a Christian man who's reinterpreting some of the Norse myths, but it is the source that we have, he tries to integrate these three ideas about Frodi a little bit. For the Christian Snorri, Freyr was not necessarily a god, but he was a man. And according to the Ynglinga saga, Odin and the Aesir came from Asia, and after many wars, Odin became the king of Sweden. When Odin passed away, Njord inherited the crown after Odin, and Freyr in turn inherited the crown from his father Njord. When Freyr took the throne, an unprecedented period of prosperity and peace began, and they called this the Frode period, the peace period. After Freyr passed away, his sister Freya kept his death a secret from the Swedes and embalmed him and kept him in a grave mound and told the Swedes that he lived there. They offered him gold and silver and copper while he was in the grave mound, and according to Snorri, it took 3 years of giving gifts and offerings before the Swedes found out that Freyr was deceased. After 3 years, the Swedes found out that Freyr passed away and insisted that he be kept embalmed and not cremated so that he could keep bringing prosperity to Sweden. And they called him the god of this world. The Icelandic rune poem reads as follows. Plenty is a boon to men, and good summer and thriving crops. The Icelandic rune poem then focuses again on the gift to men, that is the harvest. It's also worth noting that when Yera speaks of abundance concerning food, it is only positive. We talked in one of the first videos, or the first video, about Feu, where an abundance of gold is not necessarily good. If you have too much gold, you are a target for thieves. Could be that you're greedy. There's very negative associations with having an abundance of gold, too much gold. Food, good harvest. You can have as good a harvest as you want. Better is always better. More is more in this case. Plenty is simply a good summer and thriving crops. In the Anglo-Saxon rune poem, we read, Summer is a joy to men, when God, the holy King of heaven, suffers the earth to bring forth shining fruits for rich and poor alike. The Anglo-Saxon rune poem, again, is somewhat Christianized, where God, the holy King of heaven, might have originally been Freyr or Frodi or even Odin. The sentiment that a good harvest is a boon is repeated in this rune poem, as in the other two. In modern days, Yera is sometimes taken as a rune of karma because of its cyclical nature, reaping what you sow. And that is an interesting connection. But all three rune poems are clear that it's not 100% our own actions that determine the outcome of what we reap. Good harvest, shining fruit, and summer are boons given to us, which we also still have to work for, but they're not guaranteed. Hard work doesn't guarantee a good harvest. It's hard work and then hope for the boon of a good harvest. And then we have to do with what we have been given, we have to do our best. In the early 19th century, a runic stone, I'm going to go on to charms and amulets here. In the 19th century, a runic stone was found in the Swedish town of Stentoft. This was artifact number DR 357. The stone dates to the 5th century and gives a blessing to new farmers in the area in a fashion that's reminiscent of the Norwegian rune poem. To the new farmers, to the new guests, Hatu Wolf gave, and then just a Yera rune, Hari Wolf protects you and your descendants. A run of bright runes I commit here, mighty runes, protectionless because of their pervasion, an insidious death to he who breaks this. Hatu Wolf is warrior wolf, and Hari Wolf is battle wolf or wolf of battle. These two names are likely ritual in nature, just the Hatu Wolf and Hari Wolf both. Hatu Wolf and Hari Wolf are welcoming new farmers and new guests to their land, and in all probability they were either the Jarl of this region or they were Landvatir or Alfar, as they were implied to be able to protect not just this generation, but also those to come. Whether it's the current Jarl or a supernatural entity being invoked, the end goal is the same: good harvest. Similarly to the Norwegian rune poem, we see that a good harvest is a gift given to the farmers by a great political or spiritual leader. The final lines might be a little bit confusing. Protectionless, because of their perversion and insidious death to he who breaks this, talks about a curse that is put on the runestone, that the person who will break this runestone or who break this spell would get a curse where they will die a terrible, terrible, painful death because of breaking their perversion of breaking the spell for the farmers. In cultural relevance, it's important to note that while we think of the Norsemen, we usually think about Vikings, about their raids. And a Viking is a raider. It's a profession that was held in Scandinavia. And your profession was you stepped in a boat, you went to other countries, you took their valuables, or you blackmailed them to give them their valuables. Plundering and pillaging across Europe. However, like much of their more southern European cousins, most people who lived in Scandinavia were farmers or fishers in the northern region. Even those who went on raids and were then Vikings and gave the name Viking to what we now usually call all the people who live in Scandinavia in the old days, most of them would just raid once or twice, but most of their lives be farmers. And in that time, the summer months would be the high point of the year. Just before the hard toil of the harvest came and long before the semi-starvation of winter sets in, this was a time of plenty when hunting and gathering came easy. The abundance of food and good weather allowed people to make social calls to neighbors and neighboring towns. You could make a longer trek without being worried that you got stuck inside bad weather. You would have plenty of food to make the trip. You could assume that the people you were calling on would also have food to feed you, because that's always a risk if you go to somebody else otherwise. You could visit festivals. Festivals would move around. The summer and the autumn months also allowed for traveling storytellers and artisans to peddle their ware. These distractions were very welcome in a time before digital entertainment and made for a stark contrast with the almost isolation of the winter months, where you could only connect to your direct neighbors, but you couldn't travel far. This rune is the joy that summer brings and represents that golden moment once per year when you are full after a hungry winter, and then there are feasts instead of isolation and progress instead of slow entropy. These days, having a big garden is much less common than it was in the old days, and almost nobody is a farmer anymore. Yet there's still people who have a garden and who love to plant their flowers into it, make it beautiful, make it a little paradise, or people who grow their own food to feel connected to the land. Do any of you have a garden that you work in, or have you ever grown your own food? Let me know in the comments. In a conclusion, Yera is a rune that represents the year's cycle, but emphasizes the return of summer and harvest. As the year's wheels turn, you face consequences of what you did before. A farmer that works hard both in spring and in autumn and is frugal in winter is more likely to prosper. The people of the north were realists, and no amount of hard work could save you from unforeseen outside influences. In this rune, those outside influences are more often than not seen as benign, giving you just that extra push to make for another great summer. Yera then means that things are moving along and coming to fruition. This is the moment to move towards that bustling summer. You will leave the darkness and the cold of the previous situation behind, and you'll be able to breathe freely again. Now comes a time of greater freedom. In combination with Feu, the cattle rune for instance, this rune can indicate that your financial situation is either getting out of a slump or taking a turn for the better. The main message of Yera is that your financial situation is going to allow for more freedom. In combination with Canos, the torch rune, Yera is the end of sickness. The fever has been burnt away and the feverish heat turns into the more gentle, pleasant warmth of a Scandinavian summer. That was the end of Yera. If you liked what you heard and you want to hear more, please press like and subscribe. If you want to know more directly, everything I just said and a lot more is available in Call of the Runes, available on Amazon. In the description you can find the link to this book. And I hope to see you next time. Goodbye.